Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morden Alliance Church online. My name's Stafford. I'm the lead pastor here at Mac, and you're joining us in the middle of a series we're calling James, A Faith That Works, where we're taking a bunch of time throughout the summer to unpack the book of James, the letter of James, and try to understand what does it mean to have a faith that works. So we're grateful that you are here, and we encourage you to use the YouTube live chat that is happening. You can do so using your phone or computer, or you can even throw it up on your TV screen using the functions on however you're watching YouTube this morning. I have just a few announcements for you as we enter into this morning. The first one is that we are welcoming our international workers back home. Over the next couple months, R&M and G&M are going to be coming back to Canada and spending time here. So we are collecting some gift cards that we can send to R&M as they come back, and we want to encourage you to give a gift card that might be able to be used across Canada. There's going to be a bit of traveling that happens in their plans, and we want to be able to bless them with some finances to help make that travel and those expenses that they incur along the way just a little bit easier. You can drop them off at the church office Monday through Thursday during our business hours of 9 to 4. The second announcement I have for you is I'd like to invite you to join me for Stafford's Summer Book Club. I know many of you enjoy reading over the summertime, and during lockdown this is a great chance to maybe dive into a few books that you've maybe been putting off for a little bit. Sometimes we want to know where to start, and we want to read something that's not super fluffy, but also don't want to pick up a dry and boring book. So I've chosen 3 books that we're going to be reading over the months of June, July, and August. For our June reading, we're reading With by Skye Jethani. I'd encourage you to pick this book up. It is out of stock on Amazon right now, but I think Indigo has it, or there's also Kindle versions, of course, that you can get. And I'd like to encourage you to read along with us throughout the month of June. We're reading this book. And then at the end of the month, we're just going to get together, maybe in person, but at least online, to just discuss what our experiences were with this. Now, you can join us for that discussion, or you can just read along yourself and enjoy the process. But either way, I'd invite you to do that. You can let us know that you are reading along with us by going to our website, mordenalliance.ca. And at the very top, there's a tab that says My Mac. Click on that and it'll take you to the registration page, and you can just sign up, and this is just an easy way for us to communicate with you. We're also doing 2 different books in July and then in August as well. And for the August one anyway, I've actually arranged that we're going to have the author of the book is going to be joining us for a 30-minute time on Zoom. So I'd encourage you to sign up and read along. It gives us something to dive into, and all these books have been influential for me and my thinking, so it might be helpful for you as well. At least I hope it is. Anyway, we're going to enter into a time of worship together, and I encourage you to be able to enter into that with us.
In my wrestling and in my doubts, in my failures, you won't walk out. Oh, great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled sea. In the silence, you won't let go. In the questions, your truth will hold. Your great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled sea.
Hey everyone, this is a time of the service where we take time out to pray for both international workers and local churches or mission organizations. Today we're praying for Brad and Jackie. They're pastors of an Alliance Church up in Arviat. So I'd encourage you to be praying for them. And our local ministry that we're praying for is Tabor Home. Gerald Neufeld is the chaplain there, and he has given us a few prayer requests that we can be praying for.
Hello, my name is Gerald Neufeld. I'm the chaplain at Tabor Home. We have 100 residents in 5 houses and 185 staff. Since the lockdown last March, work has gotten much busier. In order to keep everyone healthy, fewer visitors are allowed in. Churches used to provide a half-hour service in our chapel every Sunday morning. Some churches still provide services on flash drives that we televise into the houses. Our Tuesday services are also recorded and televised. Devotions every morning are still done live in each of the houses. We appreciate your continued prayers. We ask that you pray for health and stamina for both the staff and the residents as we adjust to changing restrictions and as we continue to provide care and encouragement. We ask that you pray for the residents as they deal with fewer visitors and fewer activities. May we not lose heart in well-doing, being steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that our toil is not in vain in the Lord, as we continue to serve God where He is calling us to serve. Blessings on your days and on your service.
Well, hey, good morning, church. My name is Grant. If you don't know who I am, I'm one of the pastors here. So glad I'm able to be part of your weekend, whatever's going on. I hope you don't mind I'm wearing a hat this morning. As many of you know, I'm a really big Ducks fan. They're my favorite team ever since they won the Cup back in 2007. All throughout junior high and high school, I love guys like Teemu Selanne and Ryan Getzlaff, J.S. Aguirre, also Corey Perry as well. There was one year, I think it was in grade 10, I went on a trip down to Anaheim, and while everyone else on earth would be super excited to go to Disneyland, I was just more so excited to see the Ducks play at home and actually be with like my fellow Ducks fans and not just be like the one random kid at Rexall Place in Edmonton who looked like they got lost. It was a great game. I remember my dad and I, we were sitting just like a few rows behind the Ducks bench. I'm pretty sure they were playing the Avalanche in that game, and not only did the Ducks win that game, my favorite player of all time, Teemu Selanne, he scored a hat trick in that game. So the game ends, everyone cheers, and they announce the 3 stars of the game. And the first star was Selanne, of course, and so he comes out, he skates around the ice for a little bit. I think he threw a stick at some kid over the glass. Talks to the media for a little bit, and then he's heading back into the tunnel towards the locker room. And so I don't even know if I was really thinking, but I suddenly found myself, I was like jumping across a few rows of seats and put my hand out at just the right time that Selanne came down the tunnel, and we had a brief high five, and I didn't wash my hand for the rest of the trip. Now, I had this really positive experience where I got to see my favorite team play at home, and I got to have this super small interaction with my favorite player. And maybe some of you guys have a story like that. Maybe you got to meet a celebrity or an athlete of some kind that you really love, and you kind of hold on to that memory really, really fondly. Or maybe it's not actually a person, or maybe you have a favorite food that you can only really have on special occasions. Or maybe it's like a thing you own, and you really wanted it, so you saved up a ton of money, and so finally purchased it, and so now it has this special place in your house that no one's allowed to touch. Let's talk about it right now. If you're watching this live with us, there's a chat box right beside me, and I'd love to share with those kind of things. If you're watching at home with some other people, you can share with them as well. What are some of your favorite things? One of the interesting things about having favorite things is that there can be conversations that vary in degrees in passion when one person's favorite thing can contrast with someone else's. So like if you're a hockey fan and you live in Manitoba, chances are your emotional reaction to me wearing this hat would maybe be a bit different than from me maybe wearing this one. Today's sermon isn't going to be about which hockey teams Jesus liked the most, because there's no way we can know that, but we know for sure, obviously, he's not a Leafs fan. But it does have to do with favoritism and partiality. If you've been following along with us, a couple weeks ago, we wrapped up the first chapter of James, and we'll be exploring this book over the next few weeks, over the summer. But today, we're going to be focusing on the first part of chapter 2. Last time we looked at James, we talked about how a relationship with Jesus that doesn't include looking after the vulnerable is worthless. And we'll see in chapter 2, it'll cover some similar ideas, but also get a lot more specific about how not doing those things would look like. We'll see James tell us that personal favoritism is not the way of Jesus because love shows no partiality. It starts here pretty clear in verse 1. James says this. It says, "My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others?" By the way James refers to brothers and sisters, we know that it's meant directly for Christians or for church people. So if you're watching this today and you identify as a Christian and you generally understand what church is and what it is about, then this is for you. If you're not that, if you're either neutral or maybe even against Christianity or against the church, there's stuff for you here that I believe will be relevant, and I'm really excited for you to hear. But it's helpful to know that James is speaking directly to Christians in this passage. James goes on to talk about how they can have faith in Jesus while at the same time favor one person compared to another. Besides when James introduces himself in chapter 1, this is also good. This is the only time in this book James refers to Jesus by name. It's the only time we also see the word glorious added to his title. We see a lot of references to Jesus with words like Lord or Christ, just like it is here, but it's pretty rare and it doesn't happen so much with the word glory. And obviously, we don't know exactly why he decided to add this. We can't ask him today, but it could be because James is communicating that way too much honor has been given to humans in the early church, and he's reminding them of who is actually the one deserving of that honor. See, what was happening as this verse says, was people in the church were giving preferential treatment to the rich and the famous and the powerful, which isn't okay and wasn't okay. Jesus himself spoke against this. It's a pretty famous part of Jesus' life where a religious expert was challenging Jesus on the most important laws to keep, and instead of giving him one, he gave them two. It says here in Matthew, it says, Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And the first is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophet are based on these two commandments." So when it comes to those that we interact with, those that might not look or act or think like you, and you're not really sure how to deal with it, Jesus is saying the best way to interact with that person every single time is to love them. What James is calling his audience to do isn't a new thing that he or Jesus came up with. This has been on God's heart for an incredibly long time. We see it pretty clearly in Deuteronomy 10, where God is instructing how he wants his people to live after they've been freed from slavery. And in it, he says some stuff that's actually pretty similar to what we'll be talking about today. It says here in Deuteronomy, it says, "For the Lord your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords. He is the great God, the mighty and awesome God, who shows no partiality and cannot be bribed. He ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing. So you too must show love to foreigners, for you yourself were once foreigners in the land of Egypt." Now, we might read this passage, and maybe some of us have never been a foreigner living in a different country. I personally have never lived anywhere besides Canada, although moving to southern Manitoba sometimes feels like a foreign country. But I would imagine we've all kind of felt excluded or feel like we don't belong. Maybe it's your first day at a job and everyone seemed to know what was going on and going on all the time, and you could barely keep up. Or you got transferred to a new school and everyone seemed to have their friend groups and you really struggled to figure out where exactly it is that you fit. Or maybe you showed up for church for the first time and you didn't have to worry about physically distancing at all because it felt like no one really wanted to talk to you. So maybe you haven't experienced being a foreigner in like a political sense, but likely you've experienced it maybe socially or mentally or emotionally. I think we've all experienced that, and I think we've all felt it. And if we have all felt it, it's likely that there's someone that you know, whether you're aware of it or not, that's feeling that right now. And we can see from James and through the author that God spoke through in Deuteronomy and ultimately Jesus, that when we treat people differently, especially for reasons that they can't control, we're not loving as Christ has called us to love. James goes on to describe a type of gathering that's happening. It's debated on if this scenario is hypothetical or if it actually happened. It's also not really entirely clear as to as if this was like a typical worship service or if it was another type of meeting. There's discussion on a lot about those kind of things, exactly what this meeting was, but it was a meeting. This meeting was an assembly of Christians. We know that for sure. So verses 2 to 4, it says this. It says, "For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry. Another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, 'You stand over there or I'll sit on the floor,' well, doesn't that discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives?" So we see here a wealthy person and a poor person entering the same event and receiving two very different responses on their presence. The rich person was given special attention, where the poor person was essentially told just to go over there and just kind of stay out of the way. And these snap judgments that are made aren't all that different from the ones that we might make today. Maybe back in James's era, people's clothes and jewelry were more maybe direct symbols as to someone's political or social status, whereas today it might not always be that obvious. But the impression that we make on people based on those kind of things is there. We've all experienced it, and if we're honest, we're all guilty of it too. The situation is kind of like back when movie theaters were open, and maybe you went to those like VIP showings of movies, and you paid a little bit extra, and you got those like big comfy chairs, and instead of like waiting in line for food, someone came to your seat and took your order, and they brought the food to you. Like that whole experience, is like the number one thing I miss in pre-COVID life. But it's like someone got treated to like the Cineplex VIP experience, where others were like given this like seat that's maybe not really comfortable, or maybe it's like a little bit broken, or it's like too close to the screen and too far to the side, so you kind of had to crane your neck to see the whole movie. But the difference between Cineplex and Morden Alliance Church is that Cineplex is a business. It exists to make money. The owners are probably incredibly rich, and their intent is to make themselves more rich, and that's okay. That's within their rights. But the church, at least any church that I want to be a part of, while it needs money to function and to pay our bills and all that, that's not why we exist. We exist because we want to show people who Jesus is. And if we as a church start finding ourselves treating people more favorably than others based on how much money they have or political pull they have, whatever it might be, we stop loving our neighbors as ourselves. Or as James says, we start being guided by evil motives. Because we take God out of the equation entirely because we're replacing God's standard on how we treat others and how we love our neighbors with our own standard. And I don't think I need to tell you why this isn't okay. The kind of person that you are right now, whatever benefits or disadvantages that you get from that, it doesn't take away from how much Jesus loves you. And as a church, we need to be the same way to each other. We're going to move on to verse 5 and going on. James says this. It says, "Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor to be rich?" Let's try this again. "Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Isn't it the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who slander Jesus Christ, whose noble name you bear?" Sometimes when I'm preaching to a group of people, especially teenagers, when I want to get across something that's really important, and it's like the main point of what I'm talking about, I'll say something along the lines of this. I'll say, if you forget everything I've said tonight, remember this. And it's usually a pretty effective way to kind of get people to pay attention for at least a few seconds, and it gives me a chance to kind of get the one little piece of information I want to get across to them. And this is kind of what James is doing here. In the original language James was written in, the word that we've translated into listen in this passage here is actually pretty rare in Scripture. It's a word or a phrase that kind of operates as like a, if you forget everything else I've read in this letter, remember this. So this listen operates on a few levels. The first is, to actually listen. James wants us to really hear him out. The second is to absorb it. So not just head knowledge. He doesn't want us just to hear it and go okay, neat, and kind of move on. He actually wants it to be part of who we are and really think about the implications of what it is. The third is to just actually put it into action. James wants what he's saying to not just be something that we know or not just something that we feel, but it's something that we actually act upon. And I agree with James. I think if we miss this, I think we're missing the kind of people that Jesus calls us to be. This super important thing, James says, if you forget everything else, he says, James wants us to remember this. He wants us to take care of the poor, take care of the oppressed, and to treat people fairly. Jesus himself didn't have a lot of money while he was on earth. He was mistreated by the powerful, and if you think about it, these are the kind of things that inevitably led to him dying. In fact, he mentions that God chose the poor. This idea likely comes from Mary's song in Luke, where while she was pregnant with Jesus, she says that among other things that her son will, in this verse says, will fill the hungry with good things and send the rich people away with empty hands. And of course, this doesn't mean that rich people can't be saved. James himself, earlier in chapter 1, talks about how the rich should boast that God humbled them. From that and from other people we read about in the Bible, like Nicodemus, who have influence and power, but were still able to have genuine experiences with Jesus. It's not like there's like a certain amount of power you have or a certain number that's too high in your bank account for you to be beyond saving. But that's not who Jesus came for. It says, in Mark, which we studied in depth last winter, Jesus was being criticized for eating with tax collectors and sinners, which if we were to update that today would be if he were to be sitting with people from Regina and Flames fans. But they were wondering why he would eat with people that were so disrespected and cast off. But Jesus responded by saying that, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know that they are sinners. Jesus delights in showering grace on whom the world has considered irrelevant. And I believe that the church should be doing the same. James brings up a great point, I think, in verse 6 here, where it kind of asks like a hypothetical question of, isn't it the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Why do we care about what rich people think? Ever. Why do we care? You go to the grocery store and there's a whole line of magazines about the royal family or whoever. And a ton of people buy them, I guess. But they're people who don't know who I am, won't ever know who I am, and quite frankly could really care less if I lived or died. Or you probably heard about these billionaires that there's story after story about the poor work conditions of where their employees work, or there's other shady business practices that they have, and yet nothing seems to happen to them. They can continue to do what they're doing without any real consequences. And these people exist, and we know about them. Yet I think if they were to show up to church whenever it is that we can meet together again, I think there's a good chance that we might treat them a little bit differently than we might someone else, because whether we like to admit it or not, there's a personal benefit that we might receive from how we treat them. And I want to take this time to talk, I think, to you directly. I think if I, as your pastor, if you consider me to be that, has in any way mistreated you or didn't meet you with the same love or respect as I did someone else, and you suspect that it might be because of some unrighteous judgment I've made on you, then I want to apologize. I won't always get it perfectly right all the time. I hope you know that this is something that I and all of us can do better at, and I really hope that you can forgive me. I want to be in a place, and I want us all to be in a place where we love just as Christ loves us, because when we do that, it's impossible for this kind of partiality to exist. And I also kind of want to take some time to address those who are watching who might actually be influential people in their context because of their power or their wealth or their fame or whatever it might be. Because maybe you feel like this has been a little bit harsh. And to some degree that you're right, I am being a little bit harsh. But I think it's kind of because the Bible is pretty harsh towards people with a lot of worldly influence. Not because they're inherently always evil, but because the kind of power that you have carries a lot of responsibility. People who are like this, people look up to you. And often that power can go to people's heads and they can abuse it for their own personal gain. Especially if you're someone who's famous in their community. This woman I came across, her name is Karen Ellis. She's a professor down in Atlanta. She wrote about something about celebrity culture that I've been thinking a lot about in the pursuit of it, and I want to read it for you here. It says, people weren't originally designed to bear the weight of idolization. We weren't made to bear the scrutiny or the expectations that idol makers demand. The load is too heavy for the human heart, mind, and body to bear. Come unto me and rest. Under no such wind conditions is a sweet invitation. I'm persuaded that the only way a person can bear being recognized by the hordes without being destroyed is when recognition is seen as a grace of God for his purposes. Idolization is a drug for the idolater and the object of worship alike. If not handled well, internal and external pressures creates fissures for the soul. Idolatrous toeholds for both the worshiper and the worshipped. I suspect more and more that have no other gods before me isn't just commanded to protect our communion with God, it's also commanded to protect us from ourselves. So for those of us who might be rich or powerful or famous, I don't want you to feel necessarily ashamed of that. I would argue that God gave you the influence that you have for his purposes. But our call as Christians That's not our pursuit. Our ultimate goal is not fame or power, because it can do a ton of damage to our soul anyway. It's to get close to Jesus in whatever circumstances that we're in. And when we love each other as Christ loves us, it's really, really hard for favoritism to exist. Regardless of whatever influence that you have or don't have, we want to be in a place where you're welcome to discover Jesus along with us and meet him directly, exactly where you're at. And while it might seem to feel really great that we could see people of influence that are worshiping Jesus right alongside us, in the eyes of the one that we're worshiping, it is so much easier for the poor in the worldly sense to experience him in a much richer way. We move on to verses 8 and 9 here. James writes this. It says, "Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the Scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law." So the royal law, we mentioned earlier, it's the two greatest commandments Jesus gave to the Pharisees in Matthew. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. James is hammering it in once again. And if we're not showing favoritism, we're doing well. And if we're not loving our neighbors as God called us to, then not a good space. But for me, this can bring up some questions, like how exactly impartial do we need to be? Am I not allowed to have favorite people? Am I supposed to treat everyone exactly the same? Am I allowed to have any kind of preference at all? Am I allowed to have a favorite TV show or a favorite food? Or am I allowed to wear this hat? Am I allowed to have favorite things at all? Can I have a best friend? How do I treat my spouse in relation to everybody else? If showing partiality is wrong, should I have even got married in the first place? Now, unfortunately, James doesn't really get into his opinion on NHL teams, so you need to worry about that. But when it comes to things like people that aren't food or objects or sports teams, whatever those kind of things are, inanimate objects, I would generally say no. It's not necessarily wrong to be partial to things that aren't human. We don't need to have a church split based on if pepperoni belongs on pizza or not. When it would be a problem, James would say, is when it breaks the royal law. If your love for something like a video game or a sport that you either watch or that you play, or your home or your car or whatever possession that it is that prohibits you from loving God and loving your neighbors as you ought to, you might need to reevaluate your priorities. If we peel back the layers of attachment to these kind of objects enough, I think we might find that it's a vice that brings us personal comfort. It's essentially just self-love at the price of proper love for God and others. It's the same with people. It's healthy to have best friends. It's healthy to have a circle of people that you can trust. That's why, as a church, we value life groups, and we always want to encourage people to join them. Heck, it's Jesus himself. He had a core group of 12 disciples, and within that 12, John seems to insist that he was the favorite here. But it's also healthy to have certain things that you and your spouse do together and discuss together and that you also don't discuss or do with other people. And while I personally struggle with telling you how to do your marriage as someone who's not married and maybe doesn't know your situation, if that relationship causes a rift in a way that you can't accurately follow the royal law by loving God and loving others, maybe you and your partner need to maybe discuss and how some ways in which you guys can help accomplish those things a bit better. As Christians, our relationships with each other are needed in order to support each other in the pursuit of the royal law, not to break it. The last few verses we're going to look at today, it's 10 to 13 here. It says this. It says, "For the person who keeps all of the laws except for the one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. For the same God who said you must not commit adultery also said you must not murder. So if you murder someone but do not commit adultery, you have still broken the law. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you." When Jesus said to love God and love your neighbor, he wasn't discounting all of their laws, but rather he was summing them all up into kind of two that sort of encapsulate kind of the whole thing. Murdering someone, I don't think I need to convince you is wrong or need to tell you it's wrong just because Moses etched it into some stone tablets several thousand years ago, but because it's not very loving to your neighbors to murder them. It's also not very loving to commit adultery. And the examples James uses here, they are pretty serious offenses. And it might be a way in which he's again trying to urge his audience to recognize the severity of treating people unfairly. It's not loving your neighbor well because we're not treating them the way that it's not loving your neighbor well because we're not treating them the way we're called to. And it's not loving God because we're not reflecting the love that we believe he has for them to them. And at the end of all of this, at the end of this whole passage, James wants us to know that mercy is given to those who show mercy. And our merciful attitudes and actions will count as evidence of the presence of Christ within us. So, let's finally land the plane here. I was looking at the word count of my manuscript here, and this is probably the most words I've written for a sermon since I've started here. So I want to give you guys something to walk away with and wrap it up here. But if you forget everything else I've said today, remember this. When we love as Christ did, it is impossible for partiality to exist. If we're following Jesus, we're also going to end up in similar situations as he did when he was on earth. And whether or not we agree with those people, the call for us is to love them as Christ did. We're going to come across people, you'll come across people who cheer for a different sports team than you do. The most important thing is that you love them as Jesus does and not treat them any differently. You'll come across people who have different advantages in life than you do. The most important thing is that you love them as Jesus does and not treat them any differently. You'll come across people who act or think differently than you. The most important thing is that we love Jesus, love them as Jesus does, and not treat them any differently. You'll come across people who vote differently than you. The most important thing is you love them as Jesus does and not treat them any differently. You'll come across people who are attracted to different people than you are. The most important thing is that you love them as Jesus does and not treat them any differently. You'll come across people who worship different things or different people than you do. The most important thing is that you love them as Jesus does and not treat them any differently. And we do this despite everything that you've done and everything that's going on in your life. We do this because Jesus loves you, and despite all of that, he doesn't treat you any differently. And I don't know about you, but if we're a church that listens to what James is saying here and absorbs the implications of it and acts it out, we can have full confidence that regardless of where our life is or where your life is at and wherever someone else's life is, that they can experience Jesus through you. And I don't know, I think that's a church I want to be a part of. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for joining in today. This has been a blast. Have a great rest of your week. Stay safe. Hope to see you again soon.
Start on the outside looking in. This is where grace begins. We were hungry, we were thirsty, with nothing left to give for the shape that we were in. And just when all hope seemed lost, love opened the door for us. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Motley crew of misfits, these liars and these thieves. There's no one unwell here. That sin and shame that you brought with you, you can leave it at the door. Let mercy draw you near. So come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. the table. Come to the table. To the thief and to the doubter, to the hero and the coward, to the prisoner and the soldier, to the young and to the older, all who hunger, all who thirst, and all the last and all the first, and all the paupers and the princes, and all you fail, you've been forgiven, all who dream and all who suffer, all who loved and lost another, and all the chained and all the free, and all who follow, all who lead. Anyone who's been let down, and all the lost you have been found, and all have been labeled right or wrong, to everyone who hears this song, come to the table. Come join the sinners, you have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table.
Well, that about wraps up our time together as a service anyway. We're so glad that you joined us online, and I want to let you know if you'd like prayer for anything, we have a prayer team and a prayer chain that we'd love to be able to be praying for you. You can email us at prayer@mordenalliance.ca or go to our website and click the prayer tab, and we'll make sure that we have people who are praying for you. Also encourage you to be able to give. You can give to our mission locally and internationally by going to our website, mordenalliance.ca, and there's a giving tab, and you can set up giving to be able to help continue to support our ministry here in Morden, and also give to the international work of global missions there as well. Thank you so much for your generosity and leaving Mac in a very financially healthy place. And we look to the summer and what's coming in the fall, and we just encourage you to continue to give towards our mission. We're so very grateful for you. Next week, we're continuing the James series, and I'd love to invite you back to be a part of that. Until next week, see you guys later. Grace and peace, and don't forget to press on.